Lone trucker loses brakes on mountain road. Then a state trooper steps in front to save lives. It started like any other haul. Joe Matheson, a seasoned trucker with 30 years behind the wheel, was navigating the same winding Colorado pass he'd crossed countless times. But on this morning something was different. The road felt heavier, the silence in his cabin deeper, and then a sound. A faint metallic squeal. Joe didn't know it yet, but his brakes were about to fail on one of the most dangerous stretches of road in the country. As his rig began to slide uncontrollably downhill, every second counted. But what neither Joe nor the dozens of drivers ahead could have predicted was that one woman would step into the path of disaster, alone, unarmed, unshaken. Before we dive into this breathtaking story of courage and redemption, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below. These stories are inspired by real-life events and crafted to move hearts. Your support helps us keep sharing them. Now buckle in, because what happened next on that mountain will stay with you long after the final scene. Joe Matheson had driven these roads 100 times. The winding mountain pass between Durango and Silverton was no stranger to him. But that day, something felt heavier. The air was dry, the sun brutal over the peaks, and his rig was loaded, with stacked steel coils, each ton pressing his tires deeper into the asphalt. The silence in the cabin was broken only by the soft hum of country radio and the occasional hiss of the brakes. Joe took a sip of black coffee, wiped his forehead, and glanced at the dashboard. Everything looked fine, but in his gut, something wasn't right. As he approached the first downhill stretch, Joe downshifted carefully. The trailer jolted slightly. Nothing unusual. Still, a faint squeal echoed from beneath, a high-pitched screech he hadn't heard before. He raised an eyebrow, adjusted the mirror, and tapped the brakes. The truck responded, but the sound lingered. He frowned. Maybe just dust on the pads, he muttered. He wasn't one to panic. Years on the road had taught him that fear was a luxury truckers couldn't afford. But the sound. It kept scratching at the back of his mind like a warning he didn't want to face. Ahead, the road coiled like a serpent, sloping downward with deceptive grace. Joe had seen wrecks on this stretch. Shattered glass, scorched rubber, white crosses, hammered into rocky soil. He shook the thought away. Not today, he whispered. He checked his rear-view mirror again. Empty road. The loneliness comforted him. He was used to it. Ever since his son stopped answering his calls and his wife had left 5 winters ago, the road was the only place where things made sense. Gear, load, distance, delivery. No emotions, no curveballs. Then, it happened. He tapped the brakes again, and they gave way. His foot sank deeper than it should have, the pressure too soft. The truck didn't slow, it coasted forward, the engine grumbling as it picked up speed. Joe's heart skipped. He pressed harder. Still, nothing. The road ahead curved tighter now, a sharp descent with no guardrails. He reached for the trailer brake. No response. The squeal had stopped, replaced by silence, the kind that only comes right before something breaks. Panic wanted to claw, tear its way in, but Joe clenched his jaw. Stay calm, he told himself, gripping the wheel harder. He activated the radio, switching to emergency frequency. This is truck 182. Brake failure. Southbound 550, near mile marker 31. Can't stop, but heavy load. His voice was even, but his pulse roared in his ears. The cab shook as the truck gained speed. He knew this stretch. No escape ramps for the next 3 miles. Only blind curves and sheer drop-offs, miles away. Inside. A patrol cruiser, Officer Emily Carter, sipped her coffee and listened to the static chatter on her radio. Then she froze. Brake failure, southbound 550. She grabbed the receiver. Her mind raced. That stretch was near a construction zone. Families, workers. Dispatch, confirm last transmission, she said, flipping her sirens on. Gravel sprayed behind her tires as she turned onto the highway. The trooper in her kicked into action, but the sister in her felt the chill. Her brother had died on that same road years earlier because no one acted in time. Back in the truck, Joe's muscles burned as he fought the wheel. Every curve threatened to throw him off the road. He tried downshifting again. Nothing helped. Warning lights blinked like fireworks across the dashboard. He kept calling through the radio, hoping someone would hear. "If anyone's near 550, south clear the road, I'm coming in hot." His knuckles turned white on the wheel. The air around him thickened, the cabin trembling with every bump. He didn't have minutes. He had seconds. A memory flickered. His son, standing beside the rig years ago, proud eyes staring up. "You're a hero, Dad." That word stung now. Hero. What kind of hero lets his life fall apart? What kind of man can't stop a truck? Joe shook the thought. He couldn't afford guilt right now. He needed a miracle, hand or someone crazy enough to stand in his way. The curves got tighter. A sign flew past. Steep grade, 6%, next 3 miles. Joe braced for hell. And then he saw something ahead, just a glimpse through the mountain haze, flashing red and blue lights. The flashing lights in the distance grew sharper. Joe's eyes narrowed. Was that a patrol car ahead? It was too far to tell, but hope had no shape right now, only color. His rig thundered downhill, tires screeching with each rotation. He gripped the wheel tighter, arms aching, sweat stinging. His eyes. The road ahead bent left, but the speed made the curve lethal. As he approached it, he saw construction cones blurred on the side. The panic finally hit. If he couldn't slow down, he'd barrel straight into whoever was working down. Their family's innocence. His fingers trembled, not from fear of death, but from fear of causing it. In the cruiser, Emily Carter was accelerating hard. Her fingers danced over the radio controls. "This is Officer Carter. I'm on 550 south approaching mile marker 30. I'll intercept. Tell dispatch to block traffic immediately." Static crackled, but she didn't wait for confirmation. She knew the road too well. Her mind raced. She remembered her brother's wreck. Same descent, same kind of load. No one acted fast enough back then. She wouldn't let history repeat itself. She floored the gas. Her eyes scanned the curves ahead, calculating the most likely trajectory of a runaway 18-wheeler. Joe's radio screamed with interference. Voices tried coming through, but all he heard was garbled static. His eyes darted between the curve, the speedometer, now reading over 80, and the rearview mirrors. There was no time left. He could feel the trailer swaying, the weight dragging the cab like a puppet. "I need to steer into something," he muttered. "Anything." But every exit ramp had passed him already. Then he saw it, a break in the shoulder wide enough to hold a cruiser. In the center stood a lone officer, arms raised, signaling like a lighthouse in a storm. His brain couldn't compute it. Was she on foot? Joe's heart pounded. "No, no, no! Get out of there!" he shouted, slamming the horn. The sound tore through the air like thunder, but she didn't move. Instead, she pointed forcefully toward the right and waved in a deliberate motion. Joe followed her gaze. Just beyond the curve, partially hidden by foliage, was an emergency gravel ramp. A miracle, but also a trap. The angle was narrow, the margin of error razor-thin. If he missed it, he'd flip. If he hit it wrong, the truck might crush her. Emily stayed firm. Her mind was a whirlwind, but her body was calm. She knew the ramp. It was rarely used, poorly marked, and almost invisible at speed. That's why she stood there. To make him see, but more than that, to make him believe her. She thought of her brother's last words. "They didn't stop, nobody warned me." She clenched her fists. "Not today," she whispered. "You're going to see me, and you're going to trust me." Her voice was low, but it steadied. Her pulse. She held her position as the truck screamed closer. Joe had to choose, trust the stranger on the road, or trust his instincts and aim for the brush. But the officer's eyes locked with his. Even from that distance, he felt something. In her gaze, not panic, not fear, certainty. The wheel quaked under his hands. The cab rattled like it might shake apart. He adjusted the angle slightly, aligning with her direction. If he was wrong, he'd die. If she was wrong, they'd both die, and probably take others with them. "All right, lady," he muttered. "Let's dance." He jerked the wheel right. The tires screamed as he hit the gravel ramp. The sudden change in surface bucked the truck violently. The trailer jumped. The steel coils shifted. Joe thought the rear wheels might lift. The cab tilted dangerously, one side rising. Gravel flew in all directions, choking the air. He held the wheel steady, muscles locking into place. "Come on, hold." The slope of the ramp curved up sharply. He was still going too fast, but he was off the road, and that meant the worst might just be over. Emily sprinted to the ramp's base as the dust cloud swallowed her. She could barely see the truck inside it, just movement, noise, chaos. Then a shape emerged, the cab nose down, resting on the incline. Still, motionless. She stopped running and dropped to her knees, her breath caught in her throat. Then the door opened. Joe stepped out, clothes soaked, knees trembling, face ghost pale. Their eyes met again, this time with no windshield, no speed, no noise between them, only disbelief and relief. And then they heard it, a loud crack. Joe turned. One of the steel coils had broken free in the back and was rolling toward the base of the ramp. Emily looked up. Below them, on the shoulder, was a yellow school bus and stuck in traffic. Emily's boots pounded against the gravel as she raced toward the rolling coil. Her lungs burned, her mind screamed, but her feet didn't stop. The steel drum, weighing over 1,000 pounds, barreled downhill with terrifying force, bouncing and shifting unpredictably. Below, the school bus sat idly, unaware. Children's silhouettes moved behind the tinted glass, laughing, pointing at something outside. Time slowed for Emily. Her hand went to her belt instinctively. But what? Weapon stops physics. This wasn't a gunfight. This was gravity, speed, and sheer weight. Joe watched in horror, frozen for a split second. Then instinct took over. He ran after her, boots slipping on loose gravel. The descent from the ramp was steep, but he didn't feel his knees, only the surge of adrenaline. The coil clipped a rock and shifted left. Emily veered right, then lunged, placing herself between the bus and the rolling steel. Joe shouted, "No!" But she didn't flinch. She grabbed a road flare from her pocket, lit it with her teeth, and threw it onto the road in front of the coil, a desperate signal. The sudden blaze startled a passing van, which swerved and clipped the coil. The impact slowed it just enough. The coil veered off to the right, smashing into a ditch mere feet from the bus. The ground trembled. Emily fell backward, scraping her palms, but smiling in disbelief. Joe reached her seconds later, dropping beside her. "You out of your damn mind," he gasped. She looked up at him and said, still panting, "Welcome to the job." Her tone was calm, but her eyes shimmered with something raw and honest. Not adrenaline, not pride, closure. Moments later, highway patrol backup arrived. Sirens blared. Officers poured out of cruisers, surrounding the wreckage and guiding traffic away. EMTs rushed toward the scene, but Emily waved them off. "I'm fine," she said, standing. Her knees buckled briefly, but Joe caught her elbow. Their eyes met again. The bond was undeniable now. Not romantic, not cinematic, just human. Two people who stared death in the face and did what most never would. They had crossed some invisible threshold together. As paramedics checked the bus and officers reported the near tragedy, Joe walked back toward his truck. He looked at the frame, twisted, scorched, leaning at an angle. The coils inside had shifted wildly. That one loose drum had almost rewritten the lives of dozens. A single failure, a single curve, a single moment. Joe ran his hand along the scratched metal of the cab. He didn't feel pride. He didn't feel like a survivor. He felt small, and in that smallness, he found clarity. Emily approached him quietly. She handed him a bottle of water. "You saved them too," she said. He shook his head. "I almost killed them." "But you didn't," she replied, "because you listened." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he unscrewed the cap and took a long drink, as if trying to wash the guilt from his throat. Then he spoke softly. "I didn't trust anyone for years. I lost everything thinking I could do it all alone." Emily nodded. "Maybe now you don't have to." The officers began clearing the scene. A tow truck prepared to remove the wrecked semi from the ramp. Joe sat on a roadside rock, watching. Emily sat beside him, silent. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of brake fluid, diesel, and pine trees. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small metal emblem, a silver pin shaped like a pair of wings. "I got this in Iraq," he said. "I wore it on every haul since. First time I thought I'd need it again." He placed it in her hand. "You deserve it more." She didn't know what to say. She turned the pin over gently, her thumb brushing its worn edges. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I think you've still got miles left to drive." Joe chuckled, a dry sound almost like gravel. "Maybe. But I'm thinking it's time I stop before the road does it for me." The words hung in the air like fog. She didn't argue. She just nodded, understanding something deeper than words could express. They watched the sun dip below the ridge in silence. Then her radio crackled. "Emily, you good?" It was dispatch. She pressed the button. "Yeah, truck's secured, everyone's safe. Just give me a second." Joe stood up. "You should go." She nodded and turned to leave, but stopped, looked back and smiled. "You ever need a new direction, you know where to find me." Joe gave a faint nod. He wasn't sure what road he'd take next, but for the first time in a long time, he knew it didn't have to be alone. As the wrecked truck groaned under its own weight, a new sound rose, faint at first, then louder. A second coil, partially dislodged during the ramp stop, began to shift. No one noticed at first. Emily had returned to the bus to speak with the driver, and Joe was by the shoulder, watching the tow truck position itself. But the vibration from the winch was just enough to jolt the coil. It rolled an inch, then two, and then it started to tip forward, slow but unstoppable. Joe turned just in time to see it begin its descent. "Emily!" he shouted, sprinting toward the ramp. She turned her head, saw the massive steel barrel forward, aimed right at the base of the emergency path, where 2 EMTs and a young officer stood unaware. Without thinking, she sprinted back, waving her arms. "Move!" Her voice cracked with urgency. The coil picked up speed fast, bouncing off the gravel, dust rising like smoke. The EMTs froze, confused, but the officer understood and shoved both to the side just in time. The coil smashed into a patrol car, denting the frame, barely missing. The medics' torn chaos broke out again. Joe reached Emily first. "That's 2 lives you've saved today," he said, breathless. She shook her head, eyes scanning the wreck. 3, she corrected, pointing to the young officer, her trainee, just 1 week into duty. His face was pale and his legs trembled. "I froze," he mumbled. Emily put a firm hand on his shoulder. "Next time, you won't." Joe watched her, calm under pressure, compassionate without hesitation. He couldn't remember the last time someone made him feel safe. Maybe never. As they cleared the area once again, an older officer approached. Lieutenant Marshall, grey hair, stern face, decades on the force. "You should have waited," he told Emily. "Could have coordinated better." Emily didn't flinch. "We didn't have time, sir." Every second counted. Marshall stared at her for a long moment, then gave a quiet nod. "You did good." He looked at Joe. "You too, trucker. Hell of a mess, but you didn't run. That counts." Joe gave a tired smile. Didn't have anywhere to go. That answer lingered more than he intended. Emily took Joe aside as things settled down. "What happens now?" he asked. She looked out at the scene. Tow trucks, flashing lights, traffic backing up for miles. "They'll investigate, of course. Check the rig, the brakes, your logs. It'll be long, ugly." Joe nodded. He'd expected that. "But," she added, "what happens for you is different. You walk out of here alive. That means you get to choose what you do next." Joe didn't answer right away. He looked toward the canyon below. "I've never really chosen anything, not for a long time." Silence fell between them. The kind of silence that doesn't push for words, just presence. Emily leaned against the guardrail. "I see a lot of people break on this road. But sometimes, it's where they get rebuilt too." Joe let that sink in. The wind carried the scent of pine, engine oil, and burnt rubber. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathed in deeply, then exhaled slow. "What if I don't know where to start?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "That's why it's a beginning, not a plan." Before they parted again, a reporter arrived with a camera crew. News vans parked at odd angles. The media had caught wind of the miraculous brake failure escape. Microphones buzzed. Emily winced. Joe backed up instinctively. "I don't want to be on the news," he muttered. She stepped forward. Then don't speak. Let them tell the story, however. They want? We know the real one. Joe looked at her, a mix of gratitude and exhaustion in his eyes. You always like being the one who stands in front? She nodded once, only when someone has to. As the reporter asked her for a statement, Emily glanced back at Joe one last time before the cameras rolled. He gave her a small wave, then turned and walked toward the edge of the overlook, away from the crowd. He pulled out his phone, the screen cracked, battery almost dead. After a moment's hesitation, he scrolled to an old contact. Tyler, son. His thumb hovered over the button. Then he hit call. The phone rang. The phone rang twice, then a click. Hey, it's Tyler, can't get to the phone right now. Joe ended the call before the beep. He stared at the screen, thumb still resting on the red button. It had taken him more courage to make that call than to steer a runaway rig down a mountain. He wiped his eyes roughly, unsure if it was dust or something deeper. Behind him, the voices of reporters and officers blurred into background noise. But then came the sound of boots. Steady, calm. Emily stood beside him again, her face unreadable, eyes focused on the valley below. I called my son, Joe muttered. First time in maybe 6 years. Emily didn't ask why. She didn't have to. She simply nodded and waited. Joe continued. I left when he was 13, took a job across the country. I thought distance would make things cleaner. He let out a bitter chuckle. Turns out silence just builds walls you can't see until they're everywhere. Emily didn't interrupt. She let the words unravel, thread by thread, until Joe finally looked at her. You ever lose someone because you thought running was safer? Her answer was quiet. My brother. Joe's breath caught. She rarely mentioned him directly. I was the one who begged him to take the mountain route that day. I said it'd save time. The brakes failed. No one was there to warn him. She paused, voice flat. I've been trying to stand in front of trucks ever since. Joe turned toward her fully now. He'd seen bravery before, in war, in wrecks, in strangers who jumped into rivers for kids. But what he saw in her eyes wasn't just courage. It was pain transformed into purpose. It made him feel small, but not ashamed. Just human. They stood in silence, two wounded souls aligned by timing and geography. For once, Joe didn't feel the need to fill the quiet. He let it exist, thick and honest. Emily leaned slightly against the guardrail. You don't owe me anything, she said. But if you keep running from your life, it'll find another cliff to throw at you. Joe smirked. You always talk like that. Only to men who try to outdrive gravity, she replied. They both laughed, the kind of laughter that eases tension without forgetting what caused it. The tow truck roared as it pulled what was left of Joe's rig down the gravel ramp. The cab's front was caved in, windows shattered, but the frame had held. He looked at it without regret. That truck saved me 100 times, he said, and nearly killed me once. I think it's time I stop counting. Emily crossed her arms. So, what now? Joe shrugged. I go home, wherever that is. Maybe try to call Tyler again, maybe sell the truck or write a letter. I don't know, but I don't think I want to be just a ghost on the road anymore. She stepped closer. If you ever want to talk, you've got a direct line to someone who knows what rolling steel can do to a person. Joe raised an eyebrow. You give your number to every man you pull off a mountain. She smiled. Only the ones who look like they've been carrying it longer than the truck. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded photograph, a boy with a baseball glove, standing beside a younger Joe. He handed it to her. That's him. I kept this on the visor. All these years. Emily took the photo with care. He looks like you. Same stubborn eyes. Joe nodded. Hope that's not the only thing he got. They shared a look, heavy with unspoken hopes and quiet redemption. Then she handed the picture back. Don't carry this in a truck anymore. Carry it with you. He placed it in his wallet for the first time. That tiny act, folding it into a space closer to the heart, felt like a bigger decision than any he'd made in years. As the last emergency vehicle left and the noise faded into mountain air, Joe looked at Emily one last time. You ever feel like someone was put in your way for a reason? She didn't hesitate. Every time I stand in front of a truck. He nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling deep. Thank you, Emily. Don't thank me. Just live better. And with that, she turned, walking back to her cruiser. Joe watched her go, the woman who didn't flinch in the face of death, because what she carried inside her was heavier than any truck. 3 days later, the mountain road was quiet again. The wreckage had been cleared, the headlines had shifted to other crises, and the emergency ramp was once again forgotten by most. But Joe Matheson hadn't forgotten. He stood at the edge of the overlook where his truck had nearly gone over. His breath fogged in the cool morning air. In his hands was a simple object, the keys to his rig, now stripped down in a scrapyard outside Durango. He rolled them in his palm, feeling the weight of a life he was finally ready to release. He stepped, closer to the edge, where a small stream trickled below. Without hesitation, Joe drew back his arm and threw the keys into the canyon. They disappeared with a faint clink, swallowed by the rocks and wind. The act was small, almost theatrical, but for Joe it was sacred, a symbolic burial. He'd survived what should have ended him, and the road had given him something back. Not just another chance, but the clarity to know he couldn't keep living the same loop forever. Later that afternoon, he sat on a bench outside a diner in a small Colorado town. A young waitress brought him coffee and smiled kindly. Joe thanked her, then pulled out his phone again. No cracked screen this time. He'd bought a new one. He stared at Tyler's contact, then tapped call. This time the voice answered on the second ring. Dad? The voice was hesitant, cautious. Joe swallowed the lump in his throat. Hey, Ty. I was hoping we could talk. I got a story to tell you. And maybe ask how you've been. Back in her patrol cruiser, Emily Carter adjusted her rearview mirror and took a deep breath. Her trainee sat beside her quiet, more focused than before. You okay? She asked. He nodded. I think so. Just thinking about what could have happened. She looked at him and said, That's the job. Thinking about what could happen so we act before it does. The trainee nodded again. Then shyly he asked, Did that trucker ever reach out to you? Emily smiled faintly. No, but sometimes silence is the loudest thank you there is. When the mayor held a brief ceremony to recognize her actions, Emily wore her full uniform. Badge polished, boots clean. As she approached the podium, she felt the silver wings in her pocket. She didn't wear them, but she kept them close. The mayor called her name to applause, Officer Emily Carter, for courage beyond the call of duty. Her name echoed through the air, bouncing off brick buildings and mountain winds. She looked out at the small crowd, officers, civilians, strangers, and saw a man in the back, wearing a worn cap. Joe, they didn't speak after the ceremony, speak after the E. They just exchanged a nod, the kind that carries more weight than 1,000 words. Joe tipped his cap and Emily smiled. That was enough. They were no longer strangers tied by disaster. They were two people who had stepped into the chaos and chosen not to run, and in doing so had helped each other move forward, even if their paths would never cross again. Joe turned and walked away, his posture lighter, his steps more certain. That night, Joe sat in a motel room flipping through a small notebook. On the first page, in neat handwriting, he wrote, To Tyler, things I should have said sooner. It wasn't a memoir, just stories, moments, thoughts. Maybe someday Tyler would read it, maybe he wouldn't. But Joe needed to write them, not for forgiveness, but for truth. Because for the first time in a long time, his story didn't end in silence or smoke. It ended with someone standing in front of him and showing him how to stop. Emily returned to patrol as usual. The mountain road became just another stretch of asphalt again, but every time she passed mile marker 31, she glanced toward the ramp, just for a second, not to relive the trauma, but to remember the choice. Her brother's photo remained in her glove compartment, but she stopped opening it as often. The pain was still there. It always would be. But it no longer controlled her. She was no longer trying to outrun grief. She was walking beside it, finally at peace. And as for Joe, he eventually sold what remained of the rig, got a small trailer in New Mexico, started working part-time at a local garage, teaching younger guys how to maintain trucks the right way. He told them stories, not about heroism, but about mistakes, trust, and what happens when you finally let go of the wheel. Sometimes he'd pause, eyes drifting, remembering a woman standing alone on a mountain road, unarmed and unflinching. And when they asked him what changed everything, he'd just say, "Her name was Emily." If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. These true-to-life tales of courage and redemption need to be heard, and your support helps us keep sharing them. Become a channel member to support more stories like Joe and Emily's. More emotional. Revelations are on the way. You won't want to miss what's coming next.